What's up guys, it's Rowan here from AOSTV, and HSC English is one of those painful subjects that you all have to take, right? It's compulsory. And it's also one of those subjects that is inherently incredibly subjective. It's very difficult to know whether or not you're meeting the standard required in each of your assessments. And so it can feel like English is going to be this mystery mark that you throw everything at it, and at the end of the journey, fingers crossed, you get something that is going to be a pleasant, positive surprise. So in today's interview, I'm going to be chatting with student Campbell, who just recently completed the new HSC syllabus course for English, for standard English specifically. So we're going to find out a little bit about Campbell's journey in grappling with this new syllabus, and in particular as well, seeing Campbell take his results from, you know, a band 4, sort of mid-70s, 75 in year 11, to an 87 in the overall HSC, as well as, you know, internally some band 6 results along the way. And so we're going to learn from Campbell some of the things that he did to get more confident and to perform more consistently in standard English with this new HSC syllabus. So welcome, Campbell.
Thank you.
Now, just to take you back, you know, start of year 11, how did you feel about, you know, the fact that you were going to be the first guinea pig for this new HSC English syllabus?
To be honest, I didn't really know much about the new syllabus. I was like, oh, it's just English. I'll just cruise it, you know? So I guess I was a little scared because I guess there wasn't many resources around. So yeah, I didn't really bother me too much, I guess.
So then you've jumped in, ignorance or otherwise, unknown. You've started this thing. How did that first term of sort of English play out for you? Like, you know, how did you end up going in that first term of year 11? Did you notice differences in what was expected of you from year 10?
At the beginning of year 11, I remember like in the first few weeks, we just got this massive like stack of paper just full of like English notes, and then there was this assessment and I had to like write a short story. And I just remember like reading through all these notes, just being like, where do I even start? How do I do this? So first time in English was really quite hard. I kind of took me by surprise, I guess. So yeah, I struggled through the first term, I reckon.
And so you had that first assessment, and I think in the end you ended up mid-70s.
Yeah, I guess just around average.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then was that a wake-up call for you in terms of like, okay, what do I need to do here?
Yeah, I'd say so, because I'd always like kind of liked English and I kind of wanted to improve. So yeah, I guess I really did want to kind of improve my marks. I knew I could do better. Awesome.
And so then for a moment to fast forward, the end of the journey, you know, you end up scoring 87 overall, is that correct, for English, which is awesome. So, you know, across the space of that, you know, 18-month period, you know, it sounds like you were able to sort of systematically really lift those results for English, so that, you know, it was a 12% sort of improvement across the period. So well done.
Thank you.
Now, I'd love to find out for you know, the students watching, you know, what were some of the things that you did to go from, you know, a bit of a surprise, start of term 1, year 11, like, oh, this is maybe a little more challenging than I expected, to, you know, end of the journey for standard English, being able to consistently do quite well. So, you know, you got that sort of initial assessment back at the start of year 11. What were some of the first things that you decided to do when you got that assessment back to try to sort of change things?
Well, I guess I read through it and I kind of pointed out where I went wrong. I think I tried to redo the assessment actually, and I handed that in to my teacher, and I got some feedback on that. I think that was kind of my first step.
And so I just want to pause there because I think that's really important. Yeah. One of the things that I see so many students do, get a bad assessment, crumple in the bin, don't want to look at it again. Yeah. So not only did you read it, great start, you actually redid it, which is, I think, quite a step, right? Because were you going to get assessed on that again in year 11?
No.
No, right? So it's not as even though, you know, like by redoing it, you have greater use of it later on, like you're prepping for your trials or something. It was literally just extra work that you took on to try to turn things around. So you did that, you got some more feedback. What happens then? What's the next step? So step 1 is read it, redo it, get some feedback. What's step 2 then?
Well, I guess learn it. Like, that was just like standard knowledge, I like base knowledge, and it helps me in the future. Like, it helps me know more about the text we were studying. So I guess it just improved on my next assessment, because I guess I'd know a bit more. And I guess just redoing it, like keep going through it, keep going over it, just so it's fresh in your memory, just kind of always at the front of your mind, I guess.
So that was term 1 of, and the end of term 1 of year 11, right? Which as an assessment type, as you said, was a short story, creative response, is that correct?
Story, I believe.
Yeah, for reading to write, which is the module there. And then, you would have done, I'm imagining, you've got your sort of second module that comes, or module A in year 11, and then module B. So you've got these 2 more modules that end up having, a sort of multimodal response and then an essay that it culminates with, right? So you then would have jumped in, I'm imagining, probably to a multimodal. And then the essay.
A lot of memories.
Bad memories or good memories?
Bad memories.
So the multimodal is a new assessment type, which you've clearly had to live through both year 11 and year 12. What sort of advice would you have for students, who are undertaking this new assessment type, in future years? Like, what did you find worked for you in that assessment?
I would say with multimodal, start early and get all your technology ready for that presentation, because I found myself in the last week like still trying to find something to like produce it on, because you have to, I don't know, but like complete it and then send it in. You got to make sure that that's like okay in the very beginning, so that you can just cruise through the actual assessment itself.
So what I'm hearing is that there's really these 2 parts, right? Because the multimodal is you're still expected to know your text and to understand the connection to the rubric and the module. So there's a whole lot of work that you need to do on that front. But then there's the way in which the form, right, in which you were presenting it. And that requires, technology and multiple modes. And so what you're saying is, well, actually there's these 2 things that you really need to get together, and as early as possible. So what does as early as possible mean?
I would say within just the first week, know like what setup you're going to use. I think I used Windows Media Player. Yeah, that's what I used in the end, but I think it would have been a lot helpful if I kind of knew what technology I was going to use in the very beginning, if that makes sense. Yeah, and also get familiar with it, because there's lots of like cool editing tricks that can just enhance your kind of presentation.
Fantastic. So then we've got the multimodals you get through. Now, of course, different assessment type, it's a little unusual. You then go into essays. So you're finally hitting essay writing for term 3 of year 11. How did you find that?
I think term 3, year 11, those essays, I remember having to do back-to-back essays in an hour and a half. And I just remember the morning before learning so much like content. I'd say it was one of the most content-heavy assessments I did. So yeah, it was quite stressful.
And so you've got, maybe this increasing stress that's happening with essay writing and the amount that's required. Do you have any sort of tips for students, particularly year 11, that are going into that end of year 11 exam? Because it is at this point the first time in year 11, and as part of your sort of, your senior years, that you're sitting in proper exam conditions as well, right? As part of an end of year 11 exam. Any tips or suggestions based on your experience navigating that?
I'd probably just say remain calm. And I know everyone says that, but when you stay calm, you're able to recall more, and that's just really quite helpful when you're in the exam, and you're just trying to write as fast as you can, because time limits, they're really quite stressful. So yeah, it's quite easy if you remain calm and you just go at the pace you desire, not trying to like rush or anything. I think that's a big tip.
And so did you practice, had you written a practice essay prior to going into this?
Certainly. Yeah. So I had a few exemplar essays I'd written before, and not to say I memorized them, I would say I memorized all the quotes and kind of like the techniques linked to them. And so I found that if I wrote out the first letter of each quote at the very top of my exam, as soon as I started writing, I could remember it easier, because I just learnt those letters and then kind of the words attached to the first letter, if that makes sense. And then I could like go like H, that meant for how. Basically. Yeah, so I really relied on my memory quite a lot for English. I don't know if that's the best tip, but I found that works for me.
So what I'm hearing, and this is something that you took throughout year 12 as well, by the sounds of it. So you sort of really started testing it out in year 11 and that final sort of end of year 11, finding your feet and then going, hey, this is working, and it's something that you then take in year 12. So to get clarity here, because I think that's one of the interesting sort of things that students have grappled with the new syllabus is that it was obviously designed to make it harder to memorize essays.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds like that's true. But it sounds like there is a pathway, like a middle ground here that you were able to sort of find, right? Which is you still want to practice getting an exemplar essay together, because if you can't write that in practice, you're unlikely to write a great essay in exam conditions. And then what you've done is, instead of memorizing like the thesis and the analysis, like you've made it much more about making sure you have your evidence memorized, right? So your quotes.
And also I would say I use quotes that could link to several topics, so that like whatever the question asks, I'd be able to, the quotes that I've memorized are already linked to that question. So
the key is being a little creative, isn't it then?
Yeah, just having quotes that kind of work with a lot of kind of topics that you're talking about.
So just a ballpark then, let's just look at this. For one of, I don't know if you remember this, for one of the texts that you studied that you needed to write an essay, do you have a ballpark memory of like maybe the number of quotes for that text that you ended up memorizing?
So I did Past the Shallows for my year 12.
Just a very happy text.
Oh, it's lovely. I loved reading it. So yeah, and there were kind of three topics. It was environment, relationships, and loss. And so I remember having to remember separate quotes, like maybe 20 quotes for each kind of topic.
So 60 quotes in total that you know that you can use across multiple...
I mean, I don't know if I memorized 60 quotes exactly, but I remember I tried to really streamline it into maybe 20 quotes that I could kind of use for whatever question they ask. So that ended up being my relationships essay, because in relationships I could link it to environment and how they have a relationship with the environment, and a relationship with like lost like siblings or stuff like that. So that's just an example, but yeah, I really found it easier if I could link it to several topics within like your text.
So then what we've got here is we're essentially, instead of now memorizing essays, which might have been the pathway with old syllabus, what it's really becoming is just memorizing your textual evidence, like memorizing your quotes, knowing them back to front, so that then when you get into the exam and you're faced with an unseen question, you have evidence to write.
And just finding those links between the certain topics, that's really important as well.
That's fantastic. Now, I know as part of this journey, you ended up getting a little bit of support for English.
Yeah.
So you ended up working with Hannah from ATAR Smart for a period of time.
Yeah.
What sort of did you guys do together? What did that support look like?
I remember at the beginning of year 11, I was so colloquial. I did not know like smart English words like I don't know, that was year 12, we'll leave that behind there. But yeah, I was not articulate at all. And so I remember year 11 just learning how to write like structured sentences that like sound well put. And they weren't like super advanced, they just sounded all right. Like they don't need to be like super advanced, just keep it simple and straightforward. And I think that's what we really tried to push in year 11. And I found that really helps me, because I'm not the most like advanced person. I don't talk crazy. Just keeping it simple and knowing what to write and just...
Cool, so it's really about making sure like a sentence by sentence approach to just increase, in some ways, the sophistication, but the message I'm hearing is that don't feel like that needs to be incredibly sophisticated. Like there are some key things you need to do. I'm assuming it was probably some work around like your literary techniques and your vocab when it came to the sort of breadth of them, which then in turn improves your ability to analyze.
That is how I'd put it, yeah.
Awesome. And then, what was the best thing about working with Hannah?
She was just really down to earth. Like she was really calm. She kept me grounded. And like when I got a bad mark, she wouldn't stress. She'd like say, this is what we need to do. And I'd be like, oh yeah, okay, why didn't I think of that? So yeah, we went through like the essays, and she really like pointed out where I can improve, and like what I can do for next time. Yeah,
fantastic. And then zooming out for a moment once again to year 12, right, and let's just talk trials and HSC now. What advice or tips might you give for students that are studying standard English and they're looking down the barrel of their trials or HSC? Like what would you be telling them they should be doing?
Just overall?
Yeah, to give themselves the best chance of excelling in their trials or HSC.
So I'd say probably try not to be overwhelmed, and just keep keep doing those keep having like a few breaks. Don't like think you have so much work to do. Just do what you can, and then I guess that'll make you feel more confident going into the exam, knowing that you have studied and you know the stuff that you have studied, and not just like briefly looked over your whole entire textbook or whatever. Yeah, just really nailing things you do know, I guess.
And so then diving in a little specifically, if we're thinking about English, right, so let's say it's the 2 weeks before trials, and it's the first time you're expected to, write, a common module essay as well as an unseen, and then you've got 2 other essays in, your Mod A and Mod B, and then you've got, a Mod C, which could be anything, right, a persuasive, discursive, or imaginative. Were you writing lots of practice essays? Like, how were you prepping at that point in those 2 weeks before?
I'd say 2 weeks before, I was learning my quotes, just trying to learn all my quotes, and then I'd say maybe a week before, I was trying to put those into essays and found links that could work, and kind of like topics of my paragraphs and how that like links to questions. That's what I was trying to do a week before.
And so you wouldn't necessarily do a whole essay there? Or was it more like dot point form?
Dot point form, because you don't really want to waste time, because you've got quite limited time. And yeah, and I'd say a few days before, really just trying to do it under maybe time pressure. I'd just see what you can get out on paper.
So if we just go, it sounds like there's 3 steps. That's what I'm hearing there, right? We're hearing, number 1, it was coming back to quotes, which you've talked about, like really get your head around the quotes and be strategic in which ones you pick based on linkages. Then step 2 was getting practice essays, and then like dot pointing, basically, like just dot pointing out, how you might take those quotes and sort of arrange them in a way that would make sense. And then 3rd and final step, you were then doing some time condition stuff, right? Essays. So just actually then proper essays, but you're doing less of those obviously because of time, and you're doing them more immediately before, and then you've got a timer on it so that you're recreating the exam conditions essentially. That's it. And so the hope is, what we're seeing here is that you're building the muscle of being able to respond in timed conditions to an unseen question, and not need to rely on a rote memorized response, which probably won't fit anyway, which is fantastic. So 3 steps, and were those essentially the same 3 steps you used before your HSC as well?
Yeah, I'd say so. Just for HSC, I had a bit more time, and I had a bit more, I guess, room to think, so I was able to, I guess, respond a bit better. And
you did mention that, trials, you didn't go as well as you would like. And I think, to be fair, I think most students don't do as well as they would like in trials. They mark very hard, intentionally. How did you recover, right? Because, you exert a lot of energy and stress, usually, right, in the lead up to trials, and then you do the trials, and then if you get a result back that's not as exciting as you were hoping for, it can be really deflating. So, how did you handle the sort of post-trials depression that often hit?
Well, I'd say take a 1-week break, just to kind of let loose, just kind of forget about trials, and then after a week, maybe get back into it, go over your whatever results you got back and those tests, just go through where you went wrong. And then after that step, I think you'd try and maybe write it out again, try and do whatever question for whatever subjects you got again, based on some feedback maybe you got from the test itself, or you've gone to your teacher maybe. I think that might be quite helpful. And then I guess eventually just trying to do those questions yourself.
Final question on the topic here of HSC English, which is, any overall other tips for students taking standard English, with new syllabus at play as well, that you would recommend that they do throughout the year, at a certain point in the year, whenever it may be, to help them do their best?
Okay, yeah, I found my teacher quite helpful in Year 11 English, but also at the same time, she kind of left most of the work up to us. Like, she'd set an essay question, and she'd leave it up to us to complete it and get it back to her. And so for me, I sent in my essays for all the questions she set. It can be for whatever topic, whatever text, and she'd mark that, and then based on the mark, will tell me, do I need to write this again, or or will I just put it in my files and then come back to it when I need it? So for example, past the shallows, we had those 3 topics: relationships, loss, and environment, and I wrote an essay for each. And if I wasn't happy with the mark, I'd do it again. And then when I was happy, I'd leave it there, and then I'd come back to it when I next needed it, and I'd have that like 20 out of 20 response that I was able to just pick stuff out for HSC or trials or whatever, and I'd know that it would be good. Yeah.
So the key here is really, you were doing the work throughout the year and really just an iterative approach, right? Like write something and get feedback, write something and get feedback, write something and get feedback. Cool, it's good. And by doing that, it meant that trials and HSC, while still stressful, sound like they were much less stressful than they might have otherwise been, because you already had, a folder, so to speak, of work that you had been perfecting across the year that it was ready for you to then call upon. I mean, I think that's a great piece of advice for, not just standard English advanced students, any English student really, to be mindful of. So there you have it, guys. We've just heard from Campbell, who has shared a number of really practical steps that you can use to navigate both the new HS English syllabus, which has really changed the way in which students study and prepare for assessments due to the new assessment types, and the new questions designed to prevent rote learning. But secondly, we've also heard from Campbell how you can really systematically over the course of a year 11 and 12 period turn things around, because certainly, as Campbell shared at the start of year 11, while he enjoyed English, he was certainly no English genius. And so it was a matter of applied work and consistent work that really turned things around, which enabled Campbell to see a 12% improvement in English over the course of the 18-month period. So if you have any questions about how to turn things around or how to ace HSC English Standard, leave a comment below. One of our team will get back to you. We'd love to support you. Secondly, if you need further help beyond watching this video, we've got an incredible team of teachers, tutors, and mentors that can work with you to turn things around and help you really just start to push that HSC English mark upwards. It is unfortunately painfully compulsory, and it's going to count for your ATAR. And of course, finally, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. We do videos every single week, so we will see you next week.